In the golden age of 90s television, there are faces that feel like family. They were welcomed into our living rooms week after week, their fictional lives becoming a comfortable, predictable part of our own. On the iconic sitcom Roseanne, one of those faces belonged to Mark Healy. He was the lovable, slightly dim-witted, leather jacket-wearing boyfriend, and later husband of Becky Connor. With his charming Irish accent peeking through and a smile that could light up a room, he was the quintessential boy next door with a rebellious edge. Later, for a different audience, he was Doyle on the supernatural drama Angel, a half-demon with a painful past, a reluctant hero with a sardonic wit and a deep well of pain behind his eyes. He was charming, roguish, and ultimately noble. The actor who gave these memorable characters their heart and soul was Quinn. To the world, he was a success story, the handsome Irish immigrant who came to America and made it big. He had the looks, the talent, and the charisma that casting directors dream of, but the story we saw on screen was a beautifully crafted illusion. The real life of Quinn was not a sitcom with a tidy resolution at the end of each episode. It was a tragedy, a quiet and desperate struggle fought far from the bright lights of a television studio. This is the story of the man behind the smile, a story of incredible highs and devastating lows, and a cautionary tale about how the brightest stars can sometimes be the first to burn out. To understand Quinn, you have to understand the world that shaped him. He was born Glenn Martin Christopher Francis Quinn in Dublin, Ireland, on May 28, 1970. This was not the modern, cosmopolitan Dublin of today, a hub of tech and tourism. The Ireland of the 1970s was a country grappling with profound economic hardship and the dark, ever-present shadow of the Troubles, the violent ethno-nationalist conflict that raged primarily in Northern Ireland, but cast a pall over the entire island. For a young boy growing up, life was colored by this atmosphere of uncertainty. Jobs were scarce, opportunities were limited, and for many the future seemed to be written in shades of gray. Yet it was also a time of incredible cultural richness. Music was an escape, a form of rebellion, and a source of communal identity. The Dublin music scene was raw and vibrant, a breeding ground for bands that would go on to conquer the world. Glenn was a product of this environment. His father, Murdy, was a musician and singer with the popular Miami Show Band, a group that experienced the horrors of the Troubles firsthand in a tragic 1975 attack. Music was in Glenn's blood. From a young age, he was drawn to the drums and the guitar, finding an outlet for his energy and creativity. He played in local bands, most notably a group called Revival, honing his skills and dreaming, like so many Irish youths, of a bigger stage. But the biggest stage of all lay across the Atlantic. America was the land of opportunity, the place where dreams, no matter how audacious, could come true. The idea of America was a powerful beacon, promising a life beyond the economic stagnation and political turmoil of home. In 1988, when Glenn was just a teenager, his family made the life-altering decision to emigrate. Along with his mother, Bernadette, and his two sisters, Sonia and Louisa, he left Dublin behind and settled in the United States. It was a leap of faith into the unknown, driven by the universal hope for a better life. For Glenn, it was also the first step on a path that would lead him to a level of fame he could have only imagined while banging on a drum kit in a Dublin garage. He wasn't just chasing a dream, he was carrying the hopes of his family on his young shoulders. Arriving in America, Quinn possessed a potent combination of raw talent, striking good looks, and a natural Irish charm that was impossible to ignore. He wasn't content to simply find a steady job. His ambitions were aimed squarely at the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. He began the grueling process that every aspiring actor knows: audition after audition, facing countless rejections while holding on to the belief that a breakthrough was just around the corner. He took on odd jobs to make ends meet, including painting houses and waiting tables, but his focus never wavered. His first small break was a sign of things to come. He landed a role in a Pepsi commercial, a small but significant step that got his face seen by millions. He also appeared in the music video for Richard Marx's hit song Satisfied, playing a background musician, a nod to his own musical roots. His persistence began to pay off with small roles in television shows like Beverly Hills, 90210, and the short-lived historical drama Covington Cross. But it was in 1990 that he landed the audition that would change his life forever. The producers of the hit sitcom Roseanne were looking for an actor to play Mark Healy, the tough but tender boyfriend of the eldest Connor daughter, Becky. The story of his audition has become a piece of Hollywood lore. Glenn, still very much a recent immigrant, walked into the audition with his thick Dublin accent fully intact. Roseanne Barr, the show's creator and star, was initially hesitant. She famously told him, "We've got one person on the show we can't understand. We can't have two." She was referring to herself and her distinctive mumbling delivery. But Glenn's charisma was undeniable. He was asked if he could do an American accent. Thinking on his feet, he delivered a performance that convinced the producers he could pull it off. He got the part, and in doing so, secured his place on what was, at the time, one of the most watched and culturally significant shows on American television. Initially, Mark Healy was intended to be a recurring guest character, a temporary foil for Becky, but Glenn's chemistry with Lisi Goranson, the actress playing Becky, was electric. More importantly, the audience loved him. He brought a depth and vulnerability to a character that could have easily been a one-dimensional stereotype of a high school burnout. His Mark was tough on the outside, but underneath the leather jacket and long hair was a sweet, often clueless but fiercely loyal young man. The writers saw this potential, and soon Glenn Quinn was promoted to a full-time cast member. For 7 seasons, from 1990 to 1997, Glenn became a familiar face in millions of homes. Viewers watched Mark Healy evolve from a rebellious teenager into a working-class husband, struggling with jobs, marriage, and finding his place in the chaotic Connor household. Glenn navigated the show's unique dynamic, holding his own alongside veteran actors like John Goodman and Laurie Metcalf. He even skillfully handled the infamous Becky switch when Lisi Goranson left the show for college and was replaced by Sarah Chalk, forging believable chemistry with both actresses. Behind the scenes, he was beloved by his castmates. Michael Fishman, who played his on-screen brother-in-law DJ Connor, would later describe Glenn as a big brother figure. He was known for his generosity, his quick wit, and his infectious energy. He had made it. The Kid from Dublin was a star on America's #1 sitcom. But as Roseanne was winding down in 1997, a new chapter and a new set of challenges began. For many actors, leaving such a long-running and successful show is a daunting prospect. They face the risk of being typecast, forever seen as the character they played for years. Glenn actively sought to break away from the image of Mark Healy. He took on a voice role in the animated series Outlaws and appeared in the horror film Campfire Tales. Then in 1999, he landed his second career-defining role. Joss Whedon, the creative force behind Buffy the Vampire Slayer, was creating a spin-off series called Angel. The show was darker, more adult, and centered on the tortured vampire with a soul, played by David Boreanaz. Whedon needed an actor to play Doyle, a roguish, half-human, half-demon character who would serve as Angel's link to the powers that be. Doyle was a complex character, a cynical seer haunted by painful visions, who used humor and booze to mask his deep-seated self-loathing. Whedon specifically wanted an actor who could project a sense of world-weary charm and underlying vulnerability. He allowed Glenn to use his natural Irish accent, which immediately set the character apart. For Glenn, it was the perfect role. It allowed him to shed the skin of the goofy Mark Healy and showcase his dramatic range. Doyle was witty, tragic, and deeply human, despite his demonic heritage. He quickly became a fan favorite. His banter with Angel and Cordelia, played by Charisma Carpenter, formed the emotional core of the show's early episodes. Fans were invested in his journey, rooting for this flawed hero to overcome his demons, both literal and figurative. His budding, unspoken romance with Cordelia was a central, poignant storyline. That's why it was such a profound shock when, in the 9th episode of the first season, titled Hero, Doyle sacrificed himself to save his friends and a group of innocent refugees. In a final, heroic act, he kissed Cordelia, passing his psychic visions onto her, and walked into a demonic device that destroyed him. It remains one of the most stunning and unexpected character deaths in modern television history. Fans were heartbroken and confused. Why would the show kill off one of its most popular and essential characters so early? The answer was complex, and it would become a source of debate and speculation for years to come. The official line was that Doyle's death was planned from the very beginning, designed to establish that on Angel, no one was safe. It was a bold narrative choice, meant to set the show's dark and unpredictable tone. But behind the scenes, a darker story was unfolding. The heart of Glenn Quinn's tragedy lies in the chasm between his public persona and his private pain. To his co-stars and friends, he was often a beacon of generosity and light. Michael Fishman, who was just a child when he met Glenn on the set of Roseanne, spoke movingly about Glenn's kindness after his death. He recalled how Glenn treated him not as a kid, but as a peer, taking him under his wing and becoming a genuine friend and mentor. One of the most telling and rarely discussed anecdotes about Glenn's character involves his profound generosity, even as his own life was beginning to unravel. He had a close friend who was also struggling with addiction and desperately needed to go to a rehabilitation facility. The cost was a prohibitive $10,000. Without a second thought, Glenn paid for the entire treatment. He saved his friend's life. The heartbreaking irony is that he was unable to do the same for himself. This act speaks volumes about the man he was, someone who could see the path to healing for others, but was lost in the woods himself. During his peak years of success, Glenn wasn't just an actor, he was also a savvy businessman. He invested his television earnings wisely, becoming a co-owner of a popular Hollywood nightclub called the Goldfingers. For a time, the club was a massive success, a trendy hotspot that symbolized that Glenn had truly arrived. He wasn't just a hired hand in Hollywood, he was a player, a man in control of his own destiny. The club was more than an investment. It was a piece of the dream made tangible, a place where he was the host, the boss, the center of a vibrant social scene. But the pressures of fame and the easy access that came with his lifestyle began to take a heavy toll. The demons that his character Doyle wrestled with on screen were eerily reflective of Glenn's own internal battles. He began to struggle with alcohol and drug addiction, a disease that slowly and insidiously began to dismantle the life he had worked so hard to build. His castmates on Angel were aware of his problems. There were whispers of him being late to set or struggling with his lines. While his death on the show was, by all official accounts, a pre-planned narrative arc, his personal struggles likely made it easier for the producers to stick to that plan. There was no serious consideration of finding a way to bring Doyle back, a common practice in the fantasy genre. The door was closed, and for Glenn, it was a devastating professional blow. Losing the role of Doyle, a character he loved and connected with so deeply, sent him into a spiral. His personal life began to crumble. The Goldfinger's nightclub, once a symbol of his success, eventually failed, draining his finances. His addiction worsened, creating a deep rift between him and his family, who loved him dearly but were at a loss as to how to save him from himself. They tried interventions, pleaded with him to get help, but the disease had too strong a hold. In a final desperate attempt at tough love, they asked him to leave the family home, hoping it would force him to hit rock bottom and seek the help he so desperately needed. This led to a period of instability and, at times, homelessness. The man who was once a prime-time television star, whose face was on magazine covers, was now couch surfing, relying on the kindness of friends. He was losing everything: his career, his fortune, his home, and his health. The vibrant, charming man was disappearing, replaced by someone haunted by addiction. He reportedly tried rehab on multiple occasions, but he was never able to achieve lasting sobriety. The contrast between the smiling, successful actor and the broken man he was becoming was a silent, private tragedy playing out away from the public eye. The story of Glenn Quinn is not without its controversies and historical debates, though they are more nuanced and tragic than scandalous. The primary debate centers on the circumstances of his departure from Angel and the broader question of Hollywood's responsibility towards its own. For years after his death, a persistent rumor circulated among fans that Glenn was fired from Angel because of his drug use. This narrative painted a simple picture of an unreliable actor being let go by a frustrated production. However, this has been consistently and vehemently denied by the show's creators, including Joss Whedon and David Greenwalt. They have maintained in numerous interviews and commentaries that Doyle's 9-episode arc, culminating in his heroic sacrifice, was the plan from the very beginning. Greenwalt stated, "We were not aware of the extent of his problem. We would have, of course, done everything we could to help him." The truth, as is often the case, likely lies somewhere in the complex middle ground. While his death was narratively planned, Glenn's personal struggles were an open secret in the industry. It's plausible that his unreliability made the creative team less inclined to reverse their decision or find a loophole to keep him on the show. In the high-pressure, fast-paced world of television production, there is little room for error. An actor struggling with addiction, no matter how talented or beloved, becomes a liability. The controversy, then, is not about a single decision to fire someone, but about a system that often chews up and spits out vulnerable people. Did the production do enough? It's a question without an easy answer. They were running a multi-million-dollar enterprise, but they were also working with a man who was clearly in immense pain. This leads to a larger, more troubling debate about the nature of fame and the industry's culture. Glenn's story is a tragic example of a well-worn path in Hollywood. Young actors are thrust into the spotlight, given immense wealth and access, but are often left emotionally and psychologically ill-equipped to handle the pressure. The very environment that celebrates their success is also rife with temptations and dangers. Addiction is an occupational hazard, and in the 1990s and early 2000s, the support systems for mental health and substance abuse were not as robust or destigmatized as they are today. There was a tendency to look the other way, to dismiss erratic behavior as artistic temperament, or to simply replace talent that became too difficult to manage. Glenn Quinn fell through the cracks of this system. He was a man with a disease, but he was likely perceived by many as a man making bad choices. The controversy is not one of villainy, but of neglect, a collective failure to recognize the severity of his illness until it was too late. His story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. What is our collective responsibility to the artists we admire? Do we consume their talent on screen while ignoring their humanity off screen? The debate around Glenn Quinn's final years is a quiet one, filled with more sorrow than anger, reflecting on a system and a culture that may have failed a man who gave them so much. The consequences of Glenn Quinn's life and death resonate on multiple levels, leaving an indelible mark on the television landscape and serving as a somber lesson that echoes to this day. His historical significance is not found in awards or accolades, but in the emotional impact he had on audiences and the cautionary tale his story represents. First and foremost is his legacy as a performer. As Mark Healy on Roseanne, he did more than just play the dumb boyfriend. Over 7 years, he imbued the character with a surprising amount of heart and growth. Mark became a symbol of working-class struggle, a young man trying to build a life and a family with limited tools and opportunities. He was a vital part of the Connor family dynamic, and his presence on the 2018 revival of the show was deeply missed. His absence was written into the show with his character Mark, having also died, a tribute that was both touching and deeply meta for fans who knew the real story. As Doyle on Angel, his impact was paradoxically even greater because of its brevity. His 9-episode arc is a masterclass in character development. He established the entire moral and thematic framework of the show, the idea of redemption, the cost of heroism, and the importance of human connection in the face of darkness. His sacrificial death was the catalyst that propelled the other characters, particularly Cordelia, on their own journeys. For an entire generation of genre television fans, the name Doyle is synonymous with tragic heroism. His short time on the show is a testament to the fact that it's not the length of the role, but the depth of the performance that creates a lasting legacy. Beyond his on-screen work, Glenn Quinn's story has a more tragic significance. He became one of the quiet casualties of the Hollywood machine. His death from a heroin overdose in December 2002 was a profound shock to those who only knew him as the smiling face on their TV screens. It was a brutal reminder that the lives of celebrities are not fairy tales. His struggle with addiction, which played out largely in private, became a public lesson after his death. It highlighted the immense pressure faced by actors and the devastating power of a disease that does not discriminate based on fame or fortune. His story serves as a crucial historical marker in the ongoing conversation about mental health and addiction in the entertainment industry. He was one of a number of beloved figures from that era whose private struggles ended in tragedy, forcing both the industry and the public to slowly begin confronting these issues with more seriousness and compassion. His death, along with others, helped pave the way for a more open dialogue and better support systems for performers today. We can see his story as a tragic precursor to the more public mental health advocacy we see from celebrities now. Finally, the long-term consequence of his life is the enduring love and remembrance from his fans and colleagues. Decades after his passing, online forums and social media groups are still filled with tributes to him. His co-stars, particularly Michael Fishman, continue to speak of him with immense affection and sadness. This enduring legacy reveals the profound connection he was able to forge with people both personally and through the screen. He wasn't just another actor. He was someone who felt knowledgeable, like a friend. And his loss is still felt, a testament to the light he brought into the world, even as he privately battled so much darkness. His life wasn't a simple narrative of success and failure. It was a deeply human story about the fragility of it all. It reminds us that behind every public smile there can be a universe of private pain. The characters he played, Mark Healy and Doyle, were beloved because he infused them with a core of vulnerability and a longing for something better, qualities that likely mirrored his own inner world. On December 7th, 2002, Glenn Quinn was found on a friend's couch in North Hollywood. He had died of an accidental heroin overdose. He was only 32 years old. The bright, promising light that had traveled all the way from Dublin to the heart of Hollywood had been extinguished. To remember Glenn Quinn is to remember the joy he brought to millions through his work. But it is also to honor the difficult truth of his struggle. His story is not just a piece of television history. It is a powerful lesson in empathy. It compels us to look beyond the surface, to consider the unseen battles that people fight, and to remember that the most important part of any life story is not how it ends, but the humanity, however flawed or fragile, that was lived along the way. Glenn Quinn's time was far too short, but the echo of his talent and the poignancy of his life remain with us. And that's all for today's video. Don't forget to leave a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe so you'll always be in the loop. Thanks for watching.